Hello there. With every day that passes comes more proof of the economic carnage that this worldwide crisis is heaping on our economies. So where are we headed in the UK? A Tory-run communist state? Firstly, as ever, please kick that YouTube algorithm up the jacksie by giving this video a big fat like, and I'm always uploading new content, so please do check my YouTube channel daily. And as you can see, now that I'm forced to work from home, everything's changed. Anyway, before I start, I will just say what I'm about to go into is not what I think will be the outcome, but more a warning of what could happen. And to begin with, I just want to remind you all of a phrase that passed the lips of both the former Prime Minister Theresa May, remember her, and the current Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And that was, "We can only have a strong national health service because we, the Tories, have ensured we have a strong economy." With the obvious deduction that a weak economy would lead to a weak and underperforming national health service. How many times have Conservative leaders and ministers trotted that one out? But right now, that very same NHS, and more importantly its patients, are relying on a trashed economy to pay for it. And yes, it is trashed. The UK economy is not in hibernation, it is unwinding at the seams at an alarming rate. Possibly at a rate that may be catching some government money experts by surprise. And one big indicator is the IHS Market CIPS Purchasing Managers Index, or PMI. This is a large survey of purchasing managers across the globe that rate how they see things panning out for them. Every month, the PMI of just about every country is published and is one of the indicators that investors and economists follow and use. Now, a PMI of 50 is level, no change. And a PMI of greater than 50 is a good economic sign. But a PMI of below 50 is seen as bad news. The PMI data was published this morning and it shows a reading for the UK of 34.5. That's a massive fall of 18.7 from February's nicely positive 53.2. Just 1 month. This is the fastest decline in activity since these surveys began in 1996, and it is also the lowest ever reading, even sinking further than that seen during the 2008 credit crunch. And that is the enormity of the economic situation we now find ourselves in. And it's not just the UK. The US has seen a massive rise in unemployment, with claims doubling to over 6 million in one single week. That means that over 10 million US workers were laid off in just 2 weeks. And for those of you with long memories, you may recall that 2 US government-controlled mortgage lending facilities, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, were bailed out comprehensively in the aftermath of the 2008 credit crunch. Well, the Financial Times is saying they're on course for needing another bailout. And there's even a report in the New York Times saying, as companies nationwide look for relief, the Trump Organization has talked with Deutsche Bank and a Florida county about delaying payments on some loans and other obligations. Even presidents aren't immune from financial shock. And closer to home, we have the Eurozone composite PMI, now at an all-time low of 29.7, having fallen from 51.6 in February. And on the Eurozone, the PMI press release said, country-level data indicated that falls in activity were considerable and wide-reaching across the Eurozone during March. The four largest nations covered by the survey all registered record declines in activity, with Italy and Spain experiencing the sharpest reductions. And IHS Markit's chief business economist Chris Williamson said, "The data indicate that the Eurozone economy is already contracting at an annualised rate approaching 10%, with worse inevitably to come in the near future." And let's look at some of the EU PMI numbers, and remember that anything below 50 is bad economic news. France, services 27.4, composite 28.9. Germany, services 31.7, composite 35. Italy, services 17.4, composite 20.2. Spain, services 23, composite 26.7. And the Eurozone, services 26.4, composite 29.7. And if this crisis continues for much longer, where do you think those figures will be next month? But the banks and the wealthy are all well protected, as are big employers who can furlough their workers at taxpayer expense while keeping their companies solvent. And don't get me started on the football industry, where clubs have furloughed their non-playing staff on public money, but the top and very rich players have to have a union meeting to decide whether they should take a pay cut to help out their own game that they profess to love so much. I suppose they've got used to ordinary people picking up the bills for their vast wages. But if the ordinary people stop putting wages in banks, paying their mortgages and loans off, and start cancelling insurances, they are also very likely to stop going to football stadia too, and not going back in too much of a hurry. And many of the smaller businesses who employ those ordinary people are at a massive disadvantage, and are on the verge of going under now, taking many others with them, such as their suppliers. And if a company does go bankrupt, what happens to the furloughed workers' state aid wages? Right now, claims for universal credit have skyrocketed to over 1 million in the UK, and companies are opting to furlough more and more of their workers. And the Office for National Statistics said in a report published yesterday that of the 3,642 companies that filled in an ONS survey, 45% of them have seen a recent lower than expected turnover. And that over a quarter, 27% of responding businesses said they were reducing staff levels in the short term, while 5% reported recruiting staff in the short term. The Telegraph letters page has a few examples of the real impact on business. One is a company with 1,000 staff covering 56 outlets that's been trading since 1982. They asked their landlords for time to pay the rent, as they have yet to receive state aid, and the first response they got was the threat of a winding up order if they did not pay. Looks like everybody will be scrambling to be at the head of all those queues of creditors for these companies, or risk losing out. And another letter points out that thousands of maritime companies could collapse, the very sector we rely on to bring us 95% of imported food and medicines. And even dog walkers have been hit. One reported that he'd been told that his job was non-essential, while an army of NHS volunteers were being brought in, and one of their tasks is to, yes, provide dog walking services. And yet another talked about all those retired people who rely on shared dividends from the likes of banks to top up their meagre state pensions. Just look at what Alex Brummer said about this in the Mail. Across the FTSE 350 and AIM 100, some 120 firms have ditched or suspended dividends over the last 4 weeks, according to brokers Peel Hunt, at a cost of £11.8 billion to investors. some 40 companies have committed to keep paying, distributing £8.5 billion. And there are a further 100 firms which have announced dividends worth £13.6 billion, but not yet determined if they will proceed. Then there are those that run pubs. They've been ordered to shut their doors to customers, but many of their landlords are still charging rent for the pub premises. The only way they're doing their bit is by deferring the rent payments, not cancelling them, but those rents will still have to be paid. Overall, the financial experts are saying that the UK is heading for one hell of a recession, and I have to ask, at what point does that become depression? And according to Investopedia, a depression is a severe and prolonged downturn in economic activity. In economics, a depression is commonly defined as an extreme recession that lasts 3 or more years or leads to a decline in real gross domestic product of at least 10%. And those are already the projected numbers for many economies across the world. But in every other recession or depression, people were still working or actively looking to work. But right now that is not the case. People are being paid not to work. People are being told not to consume. We're also being told to stay off the roads, even if driving alone, with police officers stopping people and asking what essential mission they're on, which will massively impact the darker side of our economy too. The street value of certain substances is reportedly skyrocketing right now. Not that I know anything about that, of course. And you could imagine someone being pulled over and being asked why they were cluttering up an otherwise tidily empty street, and saying, "Yes, officer, it is an essential journey. I'm off to see my dealer before I go into meltdown." Or, "Yes, officer, it's extremely important. I'm recently divorced and need some company, so I'm off to see Sally. You know, the one with the red light over the door. But I promise I'll be good and observe the required social distancing. And I'm going prepared with protection anyway, so I can't catch anything, can I?" But it doesn't stop there. How many people pay into a pension fund? In fact, how many people have to pay into a pension fund? According to a Guardian report earlier in the year, it was being viewed as good news that the investments held by the huge pension fund that looks after the pensions of automatically enrolled workers had only fallen by 17% so far this year. And the IPE magazine reports that the crisis has contributed to the rise of UK defined benefit pension scheme deficits by around £100 billion in the last week of February. Now, this won't directly affect those on final salary pensions in the public sector, but to make up the fund deficits, the contributions made into those funds by their employers, which ultimately means you, the local council tax and income tax payers, those contributions will have to increase, meaning money will have to be diverted from other services until at least some sort of recovery is in place. And as each day passes, another tranche of workers ends up on the government payroll via the social security system. All this is something that is going to take decades to recover from. And nothing will ever be the same again. There's now no going back to how it was, the old normal. That's all gone. We are going to have to write a whole new future for ourselves, with many rebuilding from the ground up, and that will include rebuilding our lost civil liberties. Now many people will say, "Shut up, I don't care what the lockdown does as long as lives are saved, so just follow the science and do as you're told." But as far as I can see, the government is only heeding one science at the moment, and all the others, especially economics and psychology, are feeding that one medical science. Surely in the real world we need to balance this out more. We have to get people back to work, earning, paying tax and buying stuff as quickly as possible. And all this is why so many people, like Peter Hitchens for example, are starting to question the government approach. And why so many are calling for an exit strategy. Because if we grind this one out to the bitter end, we risk ending up with broken companies, broken families, a tattered social fabric and a broken economy. And that in itself could sadly cause loss of life. We risk having millions and millions of desperate people looking to the state for their daily crust, an ever more authoritarian police force, and a government that is forced to take full control of the country as a command economy. And that would make the UK far more communist than anything Jeremy Corbyn and Momentum ever saw in their wildest of dreams. Now, I'm not saying this will happen, just saying it could, if we're not careful. Anyway, if you want to hear more from me, please don't forget to subscribe and also press that little bell, or you won't get any notifications. And if you want to see more of me, buy a mug with my mug on it. So what do you think about this lockdown so far? Please share and comment, and thank you for watching.